He realized that the color of life was pink like the color of her thighs when he pulled off her tight black stockings after he took off her silly green Balmorals. The whale was as pretty as the woman in black, the woman he knew as Lacey, but it smelled far worse. It smelled of rot and disease. That struck him as strange. He had always thought it was supposed to smell better by now. He wrinkled his nose and looked around the belly of the whale. The creature's pretty rosy intestines were tinged with garlands of gray and black. A foul bacterium was eating the poor rotten creature from the inside. It was a mercy killing the doomed animal, he thought. The dripping fat caressed his cheek like Lacey's fine wispy hair. Sam slithered through the belly. He ran his hand, hugged by a rubber glove, down the stomach lining of the whale. He had been in this business for a few months now, yet he still was not quite used to the feeling of squishing the sickly sludge through his fingers and feeling its kisses on his face. He felt the acid taste of cold vomit rising in his throat. He swallowed the bile back down into his empty stomach. He could scarcely recall the last time he ate, but he hardly felt hungry. That, too, was strange. In all honesty, Sam had to admit he was slightly disappointed at his lack of appetite. He had heard that it gets easier after a while, that he would even find the scent of death appealing and tasty. He did his best to prop himself up on his knees and reached into the blubber below. He grabbed as much as his hands could hold and threw the fat into the pail. You have to get inside her, Sam. Get to know her, to love her, and she'll love you back, he had been told. Lacey never loved him. Not truly. She had loved the city, though, and the light it was known for. Paris had made his eyes sting when he thought he first saw it. It shined as bright as the sun, even in the hour of the wolf. Lacey had loved that about the city. Her mother once told Sam that Lacey had been born with one foot out the door. She loathed the bored and mundane, and the dark, just as she had loathed those tight black stockings. I haven't a clue why you bought me these. Sam, black is not my color. I've told you that. Sam, a voice called down from below, a light seeping through the hole at the top of the beast. You all right in there? Birdie can switch out with you if you need. He's a small lad, made for getting out beastie guts. The voice chuckled. Sam glanced at his pail, almost full. He had become quite the efficient worker these days. He was diligent and could work around the clock without ever tiring out. I can't leave just yet. I have to make it to the brain. The brain was the most important part. It sat in troves of spermaceti, just waiting to be harvested. Don't worry so much, Sam. It won't hurt. Just a little cut. No worse than a prick of a pin. I'm all right, he called to the voice, almost done. You're a damn fool, and you know that. You've been down there for almost 3 hours. I'm fine, Sam insisted to the voice again. The voice grumbled and faded back into the light above. Had he really been down there for 3 hours? Lacey had said he never had the head for numbers. That's why he was perfect for her. Your brain is as soft as a cashmere blanket, not hard and firm like those other men, Lacey had said. He smiled proudly through his broken teeth at the memory. He loved Lacey, and his love was pure and true, even if she did not return it. She was in love with Paris, and Paris loved her back, almost as much as Sam. She could never belong to anyone when she already belonged to those bright lights, flashing automobiles, silk and sweet ladies, and loud laughing men. But she had picked him out of all the men in Paris. She had found him in the brothel in the 13 arrondissement, and brought him back to her lovely little floral flat. He had been nobody before he met her, just another drunk living where the drinks took him, but Lacey transformed him. After she was with him, he was born anew, again, clean and pure. The monster had been festering in the sun for 5 hours, and its goopy innards smelt like rotting fish and eggs, spiced with the subtle hint of fecal matter. He missed Lacey's little flat in the city, especially now. Lacey's flat never stank. She kept it so crisp and clean that it was hard for Sam to imagine anyone actually living there. The only scent in the air was the exotic scent of her jade perfume, mixed with the lavender she grew on her rooftop garden. He smiled, remembering the way she danced around the flat and stuck purple flowers in her hair. She put lavender in his hair once, too. "You are already so sweet." Just a spritz here or there, as you would apply a hint of paprika to a dull soup or some salt to an escargot. He was almost done cleaning out the stomach cavity now. He had filled 6 rusted and ratty pails to the brim with stinking blubber. The beastie had been a fat old girl, ripe as a berry and ready to pick. He threw one last glob of fat into the bucket and to the left and tied the pails to his belt with hempen rope and climbed out of the festering stomach cavity. His eye sockets stung as he adjusted to the light of the day, and his stomach heaved with the new smells of the briny sea air and the sweating, stinking whalers. Despite his influx of nausea, he was pleased. He was about to go into the brain. He smiled. Lacey would be happy here. She had loved brains almost as much as she loved Paris. She had told him that the eyes were the best of the head cavities from which to access the brain. When 1 or 2 of the eyes were scooped out, their sockets provided a perfect opening. Sam affectionately touched the bandage around his own eye socket and reflected on how stupid and slow the whalers were compared to Lacey. The whalers had cut a hole into the beast's skull instead of its eyes and decorated it with a wooden ladder and glowing lantern to illuminate the inside of the cavity. His head thudded and he grimaced again in the glaring light. He was about to descend again into the poor creature when he remembered Lacey had told him that the brain is the most vital organ. All creatures that were given great opportunity to come in contact with the organ must be clean and relatively sanitized, so he asked for a rag from one of his fellow whalers, a withered old fellow known as Smithy. Smithy glowered at Sam as he handed him the rag. The other whalers were not fond of Sam, but he didn't mind. He did his best to wipe the bits of the beast's intestines and fat from his faded cloth pants. He took off his stained undershirt he had worn into the stomach and tied it in a neat knot around his waist. His ears continued to ring with the sounds of the whalers going about their daily business. All of their voices blended together into one and filled his ears like an overflowing pitcher. The noise hurt. It pinched his guts, and he had to put his sweet head into his hands to settle down. Lacey was never loud. She was sweet and silly, with her well-mannered japes and mischievous grin. He imagined that it was her soft hands that held his head instead of his own. The first time he had spent the night with her, she had held his head in her careful hands and ran her sumptuous lips down his hairline. "You are going to be perfect, my dear, the best I've ever had." "You're going back?" an obnoxiously squeaky voice said, incredulous. "Don't question him, kid," another sterner voice said. "He lost his head far before he ever came here." He ignored them and descended down the wooden ladder. The brain. He reveled in the damp corners of the beast's skull. It was just as beautiful as she said it was. Lacey knew everything. She was so enlightened when I left her. She won't need anyone else. Only me. I was her last, she promised. She was waiting for me, so I have to hurry home to her. He took a deep breath and filled his empty head with the smell of spermaceti. Light. Lacey loved light more than anything in this world. That's why she loved Paris. The streets were never basked in demonic darkness, but instead everything was illuminated and full of life. Even the people of Paris were different. Enlightened, she called them. They were different than anybody else. Intelligent, elegant, and far more lovely than scum from the provinces, like him. Lacey didn't think he was scum, though. That's why he loved her. She may not truly belong to him, but she thought he was perfect. He had the perfect brain, better than all the rest, and filled with just enough knowledge, enough to add flavor and spice to the dish, but not enough to make his brain tough and hard like that of academics. He smiled, and he felt the massive brain of the beast sinking his hand into the deep crevices. He knew the spermaceti lay higher in the head cavity, but he wanted a moment to enjoy the sensation of the creature's beautiful mind. He could see why Lacey loved this. He felt smarter already. He could not imagine how enlightened one would be after consuming the brain. How wise she must be. She told him he would be her last, that as long as he continued to bring her whale oil for her lights, his brain would be the last she ever needed. Oh, how she marveled when she saw it. He remembered the sensation of her mouth watering over his empty eye socket as she carefully removed his goopy organ. Lacey was right. It didn't hurt, and he hardly missed it. Without that pesky brain clattering around in his skull, he was free to focus on the task at hand. He smiled and ran his fingers along the bandages and around the eye, remembering how courteous she was when she scooped out his eyes. She had used a sterilized knife to cut along the edges and carefully lifted the eye out of his head with a silver spoon. He had climbed into the pink brain, sinking his fingers into the black crevices. He ascended to the upper cavity and harvested spermaceti. Lacey must have her light. The brain smelled like home, like tobacco smoke and whiskey and sweet lavender kisses. But there was something else there too. A secret scent revealed itself to only him. A savory smell, the scent of roasted meat or seasoned potatoes. His mouth watered. He had not eaten in such a long time. Tentatively, he grabbed a hearty chunk of the whale's brain and brought it close to his face. The slop of organ was elegant against his calloused hands. He smiled and tried a bite. Suddenly, he found enlightenment in the pink.